What up YouTube, Salvador Brigman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified YouTube channel. And on this channel we talk about crowdfunding, we talk about raising money for companies, we talk about how to get funding for your project, whether that's a new startup, whether that's an e-commerce business, or specifically today, we're talking about how to get funding for an app. How to get funding for an iPhone app, for an Android app, or even if you're doing a web-based application, how can you do that in today's funding environment? So app funding is a little bit different than traditional crowdfunding. So I would say that on average, the majority of entrepreneurs out there will tend to initially self-fund an app. They'll go out there with their savings or they're either with their money from friends and family, and they'll put that into the production of an initial prototype for your smartphone application. This is also how, when I was in college, I was actually working for this entrepreneur. He was about 25 years old, which is actually, strangely enough, around my age now. I'm 26. But he basically had this idea for a restaurant loyalty application where it's kind of like Groupon, but where with Groupon, you're going out there trying to get people to try new dishes, try new restaurants. With this application, which was called Loyal Curve, you'd be incentivized and be rewarded for going to the locations that you maybe a new restaurant or something. The more you went to this location, the more you went to this frozen yogurt shop, the discounts that you would unlock. And you would also get like freebies and goodies for your loyalty. So he wanted to create this application. He went out there and he raised money, $50,000 from a wealthy friend of his who was an entrepreneur in Washington, D.C. So this person already had a previously successful business. They are what's called an angel investor, and they put $50,000 into the creation of this application. And that's the same story, a very similar story to what many other entrepreneurs do. So they'll raise the initial round of funding from friends, from family, from anyone they know in their network who is an accredited investor, who has a successful business, or just is a wealthy individual. They'll go out there and they'll work their network, or they'll rely on their savings to create the initial prototype for the application. And that's an important stage. And before we get into also different ways to fund the application, I first want to say that when you are creating that initial application, the worst thing that you can do is to just hand over the reins to a development company being like, this is what I want. You describe it and you let them go out there and create that application. That is the worst thing that you can do. And I'm speaking from experience because in college, I actually had a website development company where we would build small websites and small web apps for clients. And a lot of these people would say like, oh, I'm imagining this idea for this cool business or this cool website or this cool idea. Can you go out there and can you build that? The difficulty with that is there's usually a very big disconnect between what the programmer is thinking in their mind for the layout and design of the site, or even the functionality, and what the entrepreneur or the individual hiring them is thinking. So you want to sort of cancel out any kind of variables in their mind. You can create mock-ups, you can create very simple mock-ups on a napkin, mock-ups using something like InDesign, mock-ups using any other software program out there where you can create the look and feel and even demonstrate the functionality of the app. And that way the programmer has something to work off of when they're making your app. So the second way that I want to talk about for getting funding for an app that I've seen a lot is with a crowdfunding campaign. So many people will see the success of some of the major Kickstarter campaigns, major Indiegogo campaigns, and be like, dude, I want to also raise money with crowdfunding. How do I do this? And they'll launch a campaign, and a lot of the times they are not successful. Apps and software applications are very different than physical goods. Usually it's more difficult to get funding for a startup when it's web-based or app-based, when you're going on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, but it's not unheard of. I've interviewed some entrepreneurs who have had successful financial raises for smartphone apps on Kickstarter. I've also seen people who have raised money successfully with a privately hosted crowdfunding campaign. A good example of this is the Hours app. If you go back into the archives of my podcast, you can see how they raised $40,000 from their community to actually build and expand the initial prototype that they created for this productivity app. So you can use crowdfunding. The number one thing that you need to take away if you want to use crowdfunding for your smartphone app is that you are going to be building and bringing most of the crowd to your campaign. You're going to be the one who's going out there and marketing the project, who's building an email list of people that you can then announce the launch of this campaign to. And the funny thing too about apps is that people don't just trust that you're going to build what you say you will. It's very easy for anyone to be like, yeah, I'm gonna build the next Google, or I'm gonna build the next Living Social, or the next Groupon, or whatever it is. The way that you can win people over and actually get them to support what you're doing is to get them to try out the prototype application that you have. The more people that you have trying out your code, trying out the initial application that you have built, the more confidence that they're going to have that you can actually execute on your vision, and then if they support you, they're actually going to get something out of it. Now, within the realm of crowdfunding, one of the subsections of crowdfunding that has been catered to really, really well with startups and with apps is actually equity crowdfunding. So I have a video out there where I explain everything in terms of equity crowdfunding, the different regulations, how you raise money. It's called Equity Crowdfunding Explained, and I'll link that up for you in the description down below. Suffice it to say that while many smartphone apps, many app startups will struggle on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, they've been really taking like wildfire to equity crowdfunding. So we're seeing more companies that are web-based companies successfully raising money under Title III of the Jobs Act, also known as Regulation Crowdfunding or Regulation CF. Under Regulation Crowdfunding, you're able to raise upwards of $1 million in a 12-month period from both accredited and non-accredited investors. I know I'm throwing around a lot of terminology to you right now, but a non-accredited investor is an ordinary person, someone who doesn't necessarily have a very big net worth, but a retail investor who can support your app or your app idea. So let me give you an example here to make this a little bit more concrete. You come up with the next good idea that's going to revolutionize the way we communicate with each other, like the next WhatsApp, or the next Instagram, or the next Snapchat, and you decide you want to offer everyone out there the opportunity to invest in this new app startup company. So using Regulation Crowdfunding, you can go out there and you can solicit interest from ordinary retail investors, and these people can participate in the funding round of your app. And in addition to you getting the funding, upwards of $1 million, you can also then have an army of brand evangelists. These are people who have a financial stake in your company, they like what you're doing, and they can tell their friends. They're more likely to spread the word about your application, about your startup, and what you're doing, and how cool and how awesome it is. So equity crowdfunding is one way that you can get funding for your app. You can also use something called Regulation A+ to raise upwards of $50 million in a 12-month period. There's a lot more to be said about equity crowdfunding, so I do recommend, if you are interested, go and check out that video that I have going more in depth into this topic. So along with self-funding, along with crowdfunding traditionally, and along with equity crowdfunding, there is another way to get funding for your application. The other way is quite simply to put together a pitch where not only are you demonstrating your vision and showing the initial traction you have, but also that this is a large marketplace, that this isn't just going to be some one-off application that maybe is going to give you some revenue in the short term, but you're really trying to build a startup company from this application. And then from that point on, you can begin to approach larger investors. You can begin to approach super angels, people putting $1 million into a company, 500K into a company, or you can begin to approach venture capitalists. Now, venture capitalists are very different than angel investors and are very different from what you think of as a traditional crowdfunding raise. They're a very different type of animal, but they're going to be putting much larger sums into a startup company, ones that they believe in. And the key barometer, aside from having a very strong team, from having a really compelling vision for the future, is making sure that you can demonstrate you have traction with your application. An application, an app or an iPhone app like Yik Yak, I don't know if you remember Yik Yak, but that was a thing among like teens, 16, 18 years old. It was all over the news, really hyped up. Even applications like, thinking back, like Periscope and live streaming, there are a whole handful of ones there. It's very easy for them to raise money because they're seeing traction. The number one metric that they're going to care about is user growth and user stickiness. How fast is this growing? How frequently are people using this? Because that gives a lot of potential in their eyes. It really downplays the risk to them, because if this application is growing, it's becoming more valuable. They can then sell your startup company to a larger company, or at a certain point, maybe you'll be able to get an IPO, maybe you'll be able to offer this to regular public investors, and in that way, they can then cash out the investment that they put into your company. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of a few different ways to fund your app startup. Going back to what I said in the beginning, the majority of entrepreneurs are funding the initial production run of their own app. They're doing it from their savings, they're doing it from their friends, their family, maybe an angel investor or two. Some of them are using debt in order to do that. It's a very difficult time in the early stages, and that is, quite frankly, why the majority of entrepreneurs are not successful in this genre. It's just very difficult. You also need traction, you need the right team, you need to have a lot of different moving pieces in place, but as you can see, it really pays off if you do it correctly. You can build a massive company, one that scales a lot, you can get a very big valuation, and you can literally change the trajectory of your life if you do it correctly. So I hope that this video was helpful for you in understanding how to get funding for your app. I have a lot more videos out there in terms of getting funding for a startup, for a business, for an e-commerce venture. If you are interested in learning more, take a second to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let me know you liked this video. Leave a comment down below if you do have any questions. And finally, if you want to check out any of those resources or other videos, go and check out the description of this YouTube video. I really pride myself in trying to cover topics comprehensively and well, so that at the end of the video you don't have too many questions, but if you do, I'm always happy to answer via comments. Again, my name is Salvador Brigman. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.